Welcome to another PhotoRec.tv photo critique. I do these about once a month for the general public. I do them about once a week for my PhotoRec.tv members as part of the weekly live show. And that is a fantastic way to really get kind of immediate feedback on images each week that you are creating. Then you get out to go out there again, create again, taking what you've learned, either composition tips or editing tips, try it, submit for feedback again. So it's just a great way to learn. I'm going to run through a couple of images that have been submitted to me in the last week. And if you want to submit images in the future, look for the link right down below this video. First up, we have this one called River Cruise. This is kind of this moody black and white image. Let's switch over to our develop panel. And we can see that this, our photographer and editor, has already done some changes to it. We have increased the exposure, brought the highlights all the way down. I don't typically like to bring highlights all of the way down. Things start to look a little gray and muddy. These lights don't look quite natural to me. I want them to be a little bit brighter, shining into that fog. So I'm gonna undo that some. The shadows you've increased all of the way. Similar to the exposure, I don't like to be heavy-handed, similar to the highlights, I don't like to be heavy-handed with these sliders. So I'm going to back this off a little bit as well. And I'm not really seeing a ton of change. I see a slight change. And if you find that you are raising this so much, then you should come back up to your exposure and bring it up as well. So somewhere in there, I think we still maintain this kind of moody feel to the image, but it doesn't feel quite as muddy is maybe too strong a word, but a little bit flat when you have to really manipulate the highlights and shadows so much. Whites are up. I think that looks fine. Blacks are down a little bit. That adds a little bit of crunch, and you've cranked the clarity up. All looks pretty good there. Let's see, F16. Yeah, I'm noticing some result or some issues because of the F16, and that is dust spots on the lens. We've got one right here, and we've got one right here. It's very interesting that stop sign is just, or some type of road sign is just almost perfectly in the center of this walkway, and I'm not sure if that was on purpose or not, but I do like it. So I'm gonna get rid of those real quick with the spot removal tool. I do this very often. I don't know if this was a mirrorless camera or not, but mirrorless cameras are quite plagued. I hit the Z key so I can zoom in here. Now this one's going to be a little trickier because of its proximity to that light. This might be a job for Photoshop, but let's see if we can cheat. Yes, see, it kind of nicely sampled from this other one. So let's see if we can get it to line up in roughly the same spot. It was roughly the same brightness, and there we go. Now there might be another one here. It's hard to tell. I think that is one, but you know, it blends in with the kind of rough gum coated pavement, so it's not too much of an issue. Okay, so I've made some slight edits to this that, you know, I don't think really changed it a whole lot. Let's look at before and after. But notice, I think that term I was talking about, muddiness. Watch this graffiti wall over here. When we go to our after, I feel to me that it just has a little bit more crispness and really kind of shows that concrete texture. And the difference between your darks and your lights feels better and more accurate to me now because we didn't act so heavy-handed with our highlights and our shadows and instead did otherwise. Now, let's put all that aside for a second, editing wise, and just talk about this image. I really like it. You know, you must be on a tripod. Nice 2-second exposure length. Everything is sharp except for our person moving down this. And this feeling, this being able to see just one person in this space, their position kind of, you know, leading away from us. I really like that. Now, I do think I'd be curious to know what it would look like if this person was just a little bit further on. But, you know, as I say that, I think I really like where she is, because she hasn't intersected these lights yet. She's still kind of big enough that we can really get the form and function, and I think this is really nice. So a couple other things you could do. You've increased the clarity a whole lot. What, this concrete over here, it could take some more increase in clarity. So I'm just going to bring my linear gradient out across this area here, and I'm going to increase that clarity a bit more. And we don't need dehaze. And we can even bring up the shadows a little bit more in that area. And it just gives us a little bit more of a hint that we're feeling, and we also starts to open up so we can see that repeating of the shadows from this railing over here. And I think that that is pretty good. I really like this image. Nicely done. From a very black and white image, can an image be very black and white? It was a black and white image, to a very colorful image from France. France now sent along, let's real quick show you the original straight out of the camera. We have these nice hints of color and reflected down here. But you did some fantastic editing and really brought that sky fire out. The other thing that I'm noticing, that when you brightened it and brought those colors out, you really start to notice this kind of mist off in the distance here. I think you've done a great job. And then of course you sent your completed JPEG as well. Look at those, how those branches change from the DNG to the JPEG, where they're just, it just threw out a little bit of detail, and to me they just look a little more spindly. I really like that they're kind of thick and dark in the DNG file. That all said, you might have taken it a step further than I would have in this. This area up here is a little bit sky on fire more than I think I would go for. But that's, this is one of those personal opinions. You have done a good job. You've really only brought the vibrance up, and you haven't really overdone the saturation. Let's see if you have any gradients as well. Yeah, you only brought the saturation up 1 and the dehaze a lot. Interesting. See, that darkening up there in the sky is not something that we naturally see. It doesn't usually get darker further up in the sky. Even at sunrise and sunset, it's more of an even kind of wash. And so I think backing off that dehaze a little bit is good. Clarity, I think, is fine. The reason I commended you on using vibrance and not saturation, there is a very important difference between the two of them. Vibrance looks for those kind of more muted, subtle colors like we saw in your original image and makes them much brighter. It does not touch colors that are already saturated or on their way to saturation. And watch, if we move this to the right, we get a very, very unreal look in this area here and down in this, and the snow even starts to get a little bit blue as well. So let's reset that back. It's funny how it looks a little dull after dragging that saturation over. I think you could do a little bit of it. But you just want to watch the corners to not get those too much. The other thing that I'm not sure about here is the snow in the foreground feels a little dark, a little blue to me. I would like to see that warmed up a little bit, so I'm going to grab a gradient slider, do the bottom here. Keep calling it gradient slider, linear gradient. And just that little bit, it's actually, just a little bit of dehaze. It's not what I was going for. I want my exposure, but it was the actual result. Bring my exposure up a little bit and warm it just a little bit as well. Now, we've had this discussion on previous critiques about, well, in this situation, the snow was kind of a dim, morning, and the snow was a little bit underexposed, and blue was a little bit more of what my eyes saw. If that doesn't have a real impact on the image, and in this case I didn't think it did, I think it is fine to make a slight change to it. And so that's what I've done here. So I think just those simple things make it look just that much better. And if you wanted to, you could come in here with a brush in this area and just kind of increase the exposure down in the riverbed a little bit. Try to get a little bit more of that detail that's happening down in there out. And I was increasing the exposure, but you could also use shadows as well to increase the shadows, and then you don't have to worry so much about being careful, because if I come up on the snow, then we have this white area up on the snow. If you do shadows though, it's really going to just find those darker areas and increase those. So I think just those couple of things just make it a little bit nicer. Overall, I think you've done a fantastic edit and really brought out the sky. Nice job, France. Scott sends in, I'm going to assume his daughter, and just a really cute, sharp, nice image. Let's zoom in and see, just are we sharp? And what do we got? 50 millimeters, f4, 1/100th of a second. All looks quite nice. Decent bokeh in the background. I always wonder what this was shot with. The Canon 6D, and so I suspect, oh, it was the 20, oh, at f4. So the 24-105. Which can be a nice portrait lens. Even at 50 and f4, you can see that our background is mostly out of focus. One of the things that you could do, though, is notice how her head is intersecting this tree right here. So a quick shift to the right a little bit that would move her into this space here and frame her then. There are some other branches back there, but they're a little further back and not quite as noticeable and strong as this guy and this guy. So she would then be framed in this little archway. Otherwise, composition I think is very nice. We could come in a little bit more on the bottom. We don't need the bottom of the picnic table to be there. And we still got a little bit of room here, which is what I was leaving, and a little bit of room here still. And just makes it a little bit tighter. You could even bring it in on the top as well to kind of balance my crop. Now, one of the things that I do still struggle with in shooting people when I'm doing a quick shot is leaving too much room above their heads. They really don't need that much room up there. So you can bring that in as well, and not best to do it when you're shooting. But you can do it here in cropping after the fact. This all looks pretty nice. A little warm. Tones are a little warm, but that kind of can match a fall day, but I might cool it down just a touch. Just a little teeny amount. And then, you know, I did notice that shooting at f4 with a 24-105, it's not the sharpest lens in your bag. Well, it might be in your bag, but in most people's bag. So you can just get that radial gradient and increase the clarity just a little bit and invert it. So now her and her beautiful hair and her just expression and details all stands out just a little bit more crisply from the background by doing that radial gradient with a little bit of clarity. And if we wanted to kind of brush on a little bit more so that more of her stood out, we could do that as well. But it's really the face that we're all looking at and we're drawn to, and those eyes and that cute smile. So I think that is really nice. And I just want to commend you again for thinking about the rule of thirds and keeping her on that left PowerPoint spot. But as I said, if you just shift it a little bit more and use some natural framing elements in the background, I think you'd have even stronger of an image. Next we have Jonathan Hill's beautiful autumn scene someplace, I think East Coast. Jonathan, if I remember, you live outside of DC. We got our J turned on, so it's showing us our highlights and our black areas that have lost detail. So the first thing that strikes me about this image, editing wise, is it feels a little flat. It could be a little more contrasty. We don't have any good reason. It doesn't feel like a misty morning or anything like that to kind of have this whiter wash that I'm seeing over this area. I think you may have brightened it, maybe a touch too much. So one, I'm going to drop the exposure a little bit, but mostly what I want to do is just kind of increase the contrast. Now we're working with a JPEG here. We have pretty limited abilities to make these changes now, but you'll get an idea of kind of what I'm recommending. No, I'm not going to. Just the tiniest touch up in there, and I don't think, yeah, a little bit in the red too as well. I think that balances those two, warming and both temp and tint a little bit, makes it stand out. Now one of the things that you can do when you really want individual colors to pop is to come down to your Hsl sliders And then here you can adjust. We've got some yellows in here that we could adjust a little bit more towards the orange side. And we have the oranges that we could adjust a little bit more. And so you can really change the feel. Again, you don't want to be heavy-handed with these, but just a little touch on them to kind of make those colors, individual colors, pop. That's another way to avoid being heavy-handed with a saturation slider as well. Otherwise, I think this is really nice, and I don't have any other things to say about it other than a common question I get from beginners is when you have a gray sky, one, should you include it? Or two, it probably to our eye or to Jonathan's eye when he snapped this picture wasn't completely gray and featureless. Our eyes have an amazing dynamic range, and are able to see the detail and even the darkest spots and the brightest spots. And the camera just can't quite capture all of that. So you could shoot a couple of images, a bracketed shot, one at a very low exposure. Let's, for instance, just take this down for a second. Yeah, you can see the detail that's up there. So you could have captured an image that looked like this. And then, of course, captured one that was exposed nicely for this area, and then captured one that was exposed nicely for the shadows. Then you sandwich the three of them, creating an HDR, a high dynamic range. They do not need to look painterly or overdone. They can be, in fact, quite subtle and just look something more like what our eyes would be able to see at that scene. Depending on the camera you have, in some cases you can do this with just one shot by underexposing and then brightening in post, saving the highlights. So capturing this in good detail, all of this would look very shadowy and dark when you captured it, but then in Lightroom you'd be able to bring a lot of that detail out. So keep that in mind on future images. And our last image that we're going to look at today is Tony Lawrence's Firework shot. This is fantastic. I suspect this is a composite. I would be really impressed. Let's say it's 3.2 seconds in exposure length. I'd be really impressed and wowed if these fireworks were all in these perfect stages at the same time to be able to be captured in that shorter shutter speed. Yes, 3.2 seconds is a shorter shutter speed for fireworks. I could be wrong, but I don't think so. Doesn't matter. You've done a fantastic job, and creating composites of fireworks is often a very easy task because your cameras already should be on a tripod, capturing from at the same focal length. Don't change that stuff. Just kind of vary some of your other settings. I've got videos about capturing fireworks. And then as a result, you can just layer these in Photoshop and screen lighten blend mode, or just kind of cut and paste pretty easily from one to the other. Another thing to keep in mind about fireworks, and I was reminded about this very recently as I was shooting the New Year's Eve fireworks, is smoke builds up over time. So try your best to get some great shots early on. Now there's a very noticeable lack of smoke here. So I don't know if these conditions were perfect or if you did some additional editing. I mean, we see a little bits here and there, but really fantastic look. The only bit of editing advice I have is that it seems a tiny bit crooked. So I'm just going to grab and drag down just a little bit. I'm really using this water and jetty pier. And I think we've got a great shot. We could cool this pier jetty down a little bit. We could use a radial gradient, or we could use a brush. Let's see what happens real quick. We cool this down. Just curious. We are working on a JPEG, so limited abilities. Anyway, a little minor change, I think, with this image, but I do think that is a little bit stronger as a result. Fantastic. Great way to end this first batch of critiques of our new year. As I said, if you want to submit an image for a future critique, you can find the link for that right down below. And those of you who have submitted and got critiqued today, thank you for putting your work out there in front of everybody and letting us all learn from it. And those of you who have submitted who haven't seen your work yet, it's coming. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.